Have a panel discussion session now on modernity and religion, interactions and contestations. We have our esteemed panelist, Professor Dr. Maszlee bin Malik, Chairman, International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, IAIS, former Education Minister, Malaysia, Dr. Maryam Wasif Khan, Associate Professor Mushtaq Ahmad Gurmani, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Lahore University of Management Sciences. Dr. Alex Taek Wang Lee, Professor, Philosophy and Cultural Studies, Director of the Center for Technology in Humanities, Kyung-hee University, Korea. Dr. Saidun Nizar, Professor, Department of Philosophy, Jahangirnagar University. Dr. Shafi Mustafa, who will also moderate this session, Associate Professor, World Religion and Culture, University of Dhaka, and Dr. Irfan Ahmed, Professor, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Department of Sociology, and finally Dr. Yasmin Saikia, Nikakos Chair in Peace Studies, Center for Study of Religion and Conflict, Arizona State University. So I'm requesting Dr. Shafi Mustafa to conduct the session.
So let me just give you a brief idea about what we are going to do. Religion and modernity is a very vast topic. So, and within 1 hour we cannot finish that discussion. And let me problematize it a little bit so that we can stay focused and we can narrow down our discussion in that direction. So, in the discourse of religion and modernity, religion versus secularism is a great debate. So how religion is interacting with secularism, particularly in Bangladesh. If I give you a little bit background to the discussion, that the same Muslims before 1947, they voted for the state of Pakistan. We all know about that. And then Pakistan came into being. After that, there is a long history of the Bengali Muslims struggle to got independence from Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And there is a debate that the Bengali nationalism or the religious nationalism and which one we know what the history or not, that's the debate. But there is a statistics of 1964 that the majority of the Bengali Muslims, they identified themselves as Pakistani Muslims rather than the Bengali Muslims. This is the statistics of 1964. After that, after the independence, secularism, along with other three principles, became one of the founding principles of the state. Soon after the assassination of the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, we saw that again the restoration of religious identity in the constitution. Again, we have seen another wave in 2013 probably, that Islam and secularism simultaneously remain in the constitution. And this is the great ambiguity. How come the secularism and state and Islam as a state religion remain in the constitution? There's a great ambiguity. Through that political history, we can see there is oscillation always between the Islam and secularism. And our national identity has been fluid since its independence. And after the 2024 quote-unquote revolution, some call it uprising, some call it revolution, and we are still struggling along the same line that what is going to be our national identity. And still, our political parties, they're struggling to find ways to make a more inclusive national identity. So having said that, I just give a background to it to narrow down the discussion from the religion and modernity to in a very particular way. And having said that, I'd like to invite now Dr. Saif Nijar to open the discussion. And my specific question would be to you at some point to discuss, can you trace the colonial lineages in the enduring divide between religious and secular identities in Bangladesh? And how might the ancient South Asian philosophies offer alternative frameworks for rethinking national identity beyond this secular religious binary? So my request would be to please contextualize the situation and also reflect on how our philosophers can be used for rethinking national identity along the line of beyond this binary situation. Please welcome Dr. Nijar, Saif Nijar.
Good afternoon to everyone. It seems to be that now I have to kind of reframe my talk actually and give an introduction to basically the current interpretation of secularism within the framework of 72's constitution and then relate it with some other aspects. So that basically other discussion can find convenient. So for obvious reason actually, when we look at the word secularism, we always connect it with basically three different ways. First of all, that is somehow connected to philosophy, legality, and actually cultural aspect. So the word secularism in legal aspect kind of within the European context actually seems to be defined as basically separation within the church. In more general form, it could be turned into basically separation between the religion and state. Second, basically in philosophy, it is more often basically confined within the basically defined as in humanism. To be precise, not the Renaissance humanism, is a new modern humanism, but basically that anthropocentric ideas at the very core and part and parcel of the Enlightenment project. And within the culture, actually, that secularism always turn up to be basically connected with the nationalism and ethnic nationalism, to be precise. So these are the aspects actually to start with, where when we start a discussion actually. So in Bangladesh Constitution actually, probably within this region, the Bangladeshi Constitution is the first constitution which first time basically we see an word secularism. Obvious question rises actually where this idea is coming from. Usually Bangladeshi scholars for last 5 decades have been pointing out that it is an Eurocentric ideas, and to be precise actually that in some way it is coming through some other roots actually, probably like India. But we all know basically that in 1972 constitution that the secularism when appears actually, the Indian constitution doesn't have that. So it was introduced in 1976. We need to keep that in our mind. Obviously, it raises question, where is coming from then? It's coming from actually Warsaw Pact and the basically Soviet Union. It's not exactly coming from the West Europe, it's coming from down there. Even though, if we look at the basically Bangladeshi constitution, there are 4 fundamental principles. We need to keep that in our mind actually. Fundamental principle is slightly different from the basic structure. Those who are familiar with the basically constitutional debate. So what is the fundamental principle have been taken in here is that democracy for sure, then nationalism, to be precise, Bengali nationalism, and thirdly secularism and the socialism. So these are the principles actually have been introduced. You'll find that basically that secularism and socialism both have been actually in 4 years later in Indian constitution have been introduced too. So obvious question rises actually where this idea is coming from. In Indian constitution, you'll find it actually that in the preamble only. But in case of Bangladesh, it's not only the preamble. There is an interpretation of it, and we'll get into it in a minute. Obviously, we know those who have done the research on that area actually, it's kind of in when the Bangladesh was getting independent, the early phase of the country that is part of the Warsaw Pact, they played an important role, apart from Australia, of course. And that's why actually Bangladesh was kind of basically finding itself in a corner
to find an acknowledgement, to make them happy and political reason. The similar reason has played for the India, because when basically India was involved in the Bangladesh 71 war, so in the global south, they find themselves in a precarious condition. What happened, like the obvious question rises actually, how it has been defined like in American Constitution, which is a Protestant one actually, and because we know basically England is cannot be taken as an example, because that's actually literally not a secular country, because it hasn't basically some form of church they usually promote. So the American version in the Protestant country, they kind of asserting that you have to make this like the no church have been emphasized through the government or the state. Whereas the laicity actually is a slightly different version, because they wanted to basically limit the religion, and at the same time they wanted to do basically contain the religion too. So the laicity is more emphasizing on basically in public sphere or administrative and political sphere religion can be expressed. So the laicity is harder version. But if you look at the Bangladeshi Article 12A actually, you kind of see that this whole point is communalism and related with the communal aspect actually. So that's the difference between the this legal definition of secularism along with how we see in the constitution actually. But something interesting had happened in Bangladesh. That's worth pointing out, because I usually kind of discuss about the decoloniality and decolonization and other stuff. So obviously on the first glance, you might think this idea is coming from somewhere else. But how the discussion is happening in here is slightly different from how it had been framed in the Constitution. The discussion in here is highly emphasized on between basically the Western concept of secularism. That's like, to be precise, there's a two way of defining it. If you look at if you look at basically a new humanism point of view, that is basically that you only look at basically this worldliness. On the other hand, basically separation between state and church. So that concept and the cultural aspect of it is in play in Bangladesh, when you will see basically public intellectual in discussing. While ironically, actually, when both sides of it, those who are criticizing secularism are also in favor of the secularism, they kind of have some form of consensus about basically that Article 12, that the part 1 basically, no form of communalism actually have been accepted. That's one of the reasons actually that neither a liberal group of people or leftists kind of endorse basically communalism, nor do the basically Islamic, predominantly it's Islamic community in Bangladesh. Because basically the Islam kind of want to supersede the tribal or communal aspect of it. So quite a lot of basically the people who are criticizing secularism in many ways basically in agreement with basically the non-communalism. That's something worth putting it. But the whole debate is going on basically the Western concept of secularism rather than basically understanding the current scenario and framework on it actually. So what I was trying to point it out actually, as I have pointed out in different places, is that we need to keep it basically that we need to, in many ways basically, that's the reason why the public intellectual in debate is that the Eurocentric concept of secularism. Probably one way of approach could be actually that getting rid of that word. And in Bangla, basically, the word usually being used actually in constitution, that is dharmanirapekkhata, which is slightly different concept from how the secularism is defined either. So that's literally meaning religious neutrality. So the constitution basically translating the word slightly differently from the basically English, and on top of that, the way it's defining not even religious neutrality, they are defining as a non-communal aspect actually. So if someone wants to basically, and we know basically last 50 years, we have been lots of debate about it actually and going on. One way of basically overcoming and conflict resolution would be basically finding a consensus, and there is an apparently consensus in here. That is basically non-communalism, and whole basically Article 12 can be reframed. Instead of having religious neutrality, dharmanirapekkhata, it could be having non-communality from that angle. And it can still stay basically all the other rights, and religious plurality can be enhanced too actually. So thanks actually, I took more than I supposed to take, but I have to reframe my whole discussion because to give a context of Bangladesh actually. Thank you everyone.
Thank you very much. Just adding to that context, that Bangladesh's secularism is, especially constitutionally, is quite different from the Western notion of secularism that is the religious neutrality as he explained. And also, through some of my research, I basically argued that the very use of the term secularism, that angered both Islamists and also the leftists. You know why? Because the use of the term secularism, the leftists took that as an opportunity to make it a Western style of secularism. And the Islamists also at the same time got angered because they also interpreted that secularism as a Western sort of secularism, and that's completely devoid of religion. You see the tension of using is the game around the use of the language. But this is true. That constitutionally, that secularism does not mean the devoid of religion. But in practice, we have seen this has angered both groups, and we have also seen the practices that how that has created Islamophobic attitude from different sections of elite groups. I would say I would put that. I would put it in that way. So having said that, may I now request Professor Irfan Ahmed to actually put your thoughts on it, and especially in the wake of the July Revolution, what would have been the best solution for us in light your anthropos, socio expertise in that area. Thank you, Professor.
If you look at this poster, modernity / religion, what is it? It is a concept. Okay? Secularism is also a concept. Then you have to ask this question, how is concept formed? I want to submit to you that secularism is a combat concept. So this is an idea developed by Reinhard Boschi. Western power ruled the world by creating combat concept. Progress is a combat concept. Okay? The missionary division of the world into heathen and the believers. And by believers they mean the Christians. So, or heathen versus civilized. It is not a neutral concept, it is a combat concept. I want to submit to you that secularism is basically a combat concept. Okay? Now, but this needs to be further unpacked. In the history of the Mughal Empire and the Ottoman Empire, political formation. Okay? So if the question is how people of different faiths and traditions can live together under one political community, okay? That is not secularism, Ottoman Empire. But they did call it secular. The moment you use the word secular, you are basically playing a role of native informant. I reject that idea completely that Bangladeshi secularism is unique. I mean, Indians have been saying the same thing. Wow, we are exceptional. It doesn't mean this. Actually, it is part of the nationalist narrative. When you are educated in India, you say that India is a unique nation in the sense that the unity and diversity is unique to India. You go to Indonesia, I mean, in Papua New Guinea, there are 500 languages. So what kind of diversity you are talking about? You know, Indonesia. So this actually the idea of uniqueness
just a second,
is part of nationalist historiography. There is no nation which says that we are like any other nation. There is always a distinction. Now from here, I want you to take you to theoretical debate. So it is a combat concept, especially today, because it is a weapon which is used to discipline different section of people, telling that, look, you have to fit here and there, okay? But if the question is of how people from different faiths and traditions and communities can live together, then we have to rely on our own indigenous traditions. And I gave you the example of Mughal Empire and the Ottoman Empire. It was very multi-ethnic, which the term that I don't want to use. So I would use multi-community oriented. Okay? Now the second thing is, I don't think we can have political freedom as long as we have intellectual freedom. So what I mean here, if you look at this term called modernity or religion, okay? So as you know by now that there is something called combat term, okay? Heathen, civilized, progress, these are all combat terms. The other thing is, concepts are also, philosophers make a difference between two kinds of concept. One is experience near and experience distant. So when I say, for example, culture, Ministry of Tourism people, they will also know what is culture. But the meaning of that term is not exactly in the same way as sociologists or anthropologists might use it. Okay? There are also concepts which are observational concepts, and there are concepts which are not observable. So for example, if I make a thesis here, an argument about a concept like intimacy, okay, and I propose that people kissing each other are intimate. So here, kissing is an observational concept. You can observe it, okay? And then the theoretical concept is intimacy. But there are concepts which are not empirically observable. Like for example, Deluge and Guattari, they talk about rhizome. It is very hard to empirically observe it. Okay? Now, my final point is that you cannot have political freedom as long as you use the concept supplied by an oppressive regime and you use it by working as what it would say, native informants. So you take the concept of secularism from outside and then you say, Indians are saying this, you know, Bangladeshi can also do it, other people can also do it. No, we use, but we are supplying resources to you that we also have secularism. No, we don't have secularism, right? And why there is a need to be apologetic? If you mean how to deal with religious diversity, live together peacefully, there is a concept, okay? And therefore, I do not like this thing to be translated. So, none of these languages actually have that term, right? So you do the act of translation. Now, translation is a very complicated business. Why I would allow myself, and this is the final point I want to make, because there is concepts are also of two kinds. One is emic and the etic. Emic is the way I look at myself, and etic is the term others use to describe me. So for example, those of you who have lived in Europe or elsewhere, I had some experience that I would be described as black. Okay? But in the eyes of my late mother, I was not black. She probably thought that I'm the most, handsome boy. So why if somebody calls me black, okay, it is an act of intellectual slavery that I allow myself to be defined by the terms from others. So in my writings, I don't translate Sharia as a holy law, which is the standard translation. Because by translating it as a holy law, you do violence. You follow, because the idea of holiness, the way it exists in Christianity, that is entirely foreign to Islamic tradition. There is no Trinity and holiness. So any act of translation, when you translate Sharia as holy law, is already an act of violence. Now, to conclude, what I would suggest to you is that rather than export this concept from elsewhere and then supply or use our history and archive to say that, look, we also have it something. It is called Dharma Nirpekha and all that, but that is also what Indians say. And this claim for uniqueness and so on. So I would suggest that both this modernity, in any case, modernity is a Christian term. It was used for the first time to mark the passage from pagan times and inauguration of Christian era. Okay? My grandfather or grandmother, they never used this term called modernity. So it is not too close to their experience by it. And modernity itself 50 years ago, nobody was using this term. So it is also the question to ask is that for my whatever 100 years ago, people in Bangladesh under British colonialism, they were not experiencing modernity. It is a term given by colonizing academic vocabulary. If you talk to the people in Bangladesh, they will be talking about colonization, they will be talking about domination, they will be talking about inequality, not modernity. So why we are using this term, religion? I don't think Islam is a religion. I mean, you have a Latin term, religion, and then you impose on it. This is not how Muslims themselves are described. And therefore, the Islamic idea of religion is deen. Okay? As I would not translate Sharia into holy law, because that is already an act of violence, I will not, if you think, because this, I wrote an essay which is called, where I describe that how modernity is an oppressive category. It is also based on, and this is something most historians who are often uncritical, they have a notion of time which is divided into past, present, and future. Okay? That is not the Islamic idea of time, by the way. Because you cannot think about modernity without this tripartite division of past, present, and future. The Quranic idea of time is very different. You know, if you have the entire story of Ambiya, if you, the story of that discipline of history is based on this stupid idea of chronology. I mean, the mainstream. So from there, if you have an idea of modernity, which is based on chronological, okay, it's very different. So if so both modernity and religion, these are oppressive categories. We should not be allowing ourselves to be defined by the prevalent terms. So Allah created people as insan. It is the power which transforms these people into immigrants, legal, illegal, and so on and so forth. Okay? So the point is, what Bourdieu calls doxa. Doxa is a set of terms with which you think, but about which you do not think. So for example, the different states give you this term, oh, a group of people is refugees, immigrants, illegal, deviant. And you, rather than question them, you use those very categories supplied by the power that be, and then you want to think about liberation or justice. That is not the way to think about emancipatory politics. Modernity, religion, secularism, these are, modernity is an oppressive term. Religion is not part of the experience of, even Hindus didn't describe themselves as what they think as faith, as religion. So these are some of the things that I wanted to put forward to you to think about in terms of religion and secularism. Thank you.
So much, yeah. So, I'm going to take a few seconds to lay out some ideas here. This is very much part of my older work, and I think, but it does inform in many ways the way one is able to understand religious identity in the modern nation state, especially in the post-colonial world. And again, the post-colonial world as we know it, modern South Asia is really the place that I'm talking about. So the argument I'm going to really pose here is that modern religious identity, as we exercise it, practice it via the state, via cultural institutions, via social institutions, in many ways is a symptom of the success of British Orientalism, an extended project that really, the birthplace of which is Calcutta, and of course that spreads across the Indian subcontinent over subsequent decades and centuries. And that results in the very powerful notions of linguistic religious categories that emerged as Hindu and Muslim most strongly, and that eventually also, of course, affect the way in which the Bengali Muslims of East Pakistan were treated, precisely because Urdu in many ways becomes the religio-national language of the Muslims of the Indian subcontinent. So that's the broad idea I'm going to pose here, and in my work, I've actually talked at length about how Urdu takes on certain certain Muslim formations over the course of the 19th century, and that these then are able to morph into a very powerful nationalist impulse over the course of the 20th century. Particularly in those literary forms that were shepherded and patronized by British Orientalists who were in the Indian subcontinent, and so I'm very careful to separate the poetic tradition from this, because it was one of the traditions that imperialism and colonial institutions were not able to take a hold of in the way that they were of prose fiction, which is really a genre that emerged under the tutelage and the financial patronage, first of an institution known as Fort William College, and then after that through a large network of schooling, of British schooling, of British colonial schools that sprouted over India from 1830s onward. And then, of course, after 1857, which is, of course, a revolution we haven't spoken about much in this conference, but after 1857, the big project for the British government of India becomes to reform categories of religion via literature. So large amounts of money are offered to authors to create literatures that will modernize the Muslim woman, precisely because the Muslim mother was even then seen as the mother of terrorists who did not acknowledge the British state and did not acknowledge Queen Victoria as their queen, etc. And so what comes out of both of this post-1857 moment, and again, please do remember that large amounts of money are being spent here to really create a literary tradition in languages such as Urdu and Hindi that did not exist prior to the imperial rule by the British. And it's really after 1857 that Urdu fiction becomes a very powerful mode of defining Muslimness that slowly in South Asia and in North India in particular. So in the most famous of which is a gentleman by the name of Deputy Nazir Ahmad, who again spoke at wrote novels for women, wrote novels for families about what ideal Muslimness looks like, and it's here that really a very strong Sunni tradition begins to emerge, where for example in Deputy Nazir Ahmad's works, Shiite practices are called bid'at. There is a separation, Persian practices are practices that of course are coming from the Persian tradition, are slowly sidelined in favor of Arabic and English. And in other words, what's being created very slowly is a new Muslim subject for North India in these novels, and both men and women, of course, are being reformed via these literary works. They received incredible amounts of patronage. They became school textbooks. Everybody in North India, and I imagine at the time in Bengal, also had to be knowledgeable about these works because they were used for exam entries into colleges, etc. So if you wanted to go to university, you had to do that. Anyway, what Nazir Ahmad and this entire tradition of creating prose fiction does is to really create an effect. So Nazir Ahmad is followed by several others, but most noticeably by a writer called Naseem Hijazi, who remains one of the most popular novelists in Pakistan today. He's from the 1940s. His first book, was called Dastan-e-Mujahid. It's really about it's a glorification of the earlier jihad. I might take 2 extra minutes, guys. Okay, sorry. I just want to get this through. And then, of course, another book called Muhammad bin Qasim, which in essence marks this kind of birth of Pakistan from 6 I think 670 or whenever Muhammad bin Qasim lands up in Sindh, but I do forget the year, I apologize. But really, that novel really marks the beginning of Pakistan as not something that happens in 1947 or that comes with the division of Bengal, etc., but rather as something that was inevitable with Islam. And so, in a sense, what I'm suggesting here is that a series of very popular novels shape the national imagination in ways that we are unable to counter, and this is all over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. Let me come to our present moment, and let me speak a little bit about Pakistan, because the question of religion in modernity is an important one. And in Pakistan and in India, what you have in the present, that is of course a historical effect of this 19th century and 20th century movements, is what you call a revivalism, and a very powerful revivalism movement that takes place, has all kinds of manifestations. So Imran Khan, who I believe is incredibly popular in this country, terrible, but his whole campaign, his whole political campaign is on the notion of Riyasat-e-Madina, right? That I will turn Pakistan into a Riyasat-e-Madina, and that is somehow going to save the country. It comes up in the form of dawa movements that target women in particular, right? There is a notion that if you are an oppressed entity in modern society, religion will save you, right? So the dawa movements, and they're rife in Egypt, Pakistan, I think possibly here also is my guess. The other is, of course, cultural programming that takes place, so very benign forms, and I was speaking about the Urdu drama earlier, but these forms, of course, also push a certain kind of religious identity very gently through romance, through social mobility as well. So the poor girl from a middle-class neighborhood marries and reforms this elite religious-less, completely a-religious family, and brings happiness to all of them via her good practices. And then, of course, in India, we have, if nothing else, I mean, there's many examples, I'm sure, but there's Modi's performativity above all, and of course, recent Bollywood films. Let me just take 1 second, okay, to define an alternative way of thinking about secularity. I know the ones we have got are more disciplinary. Let me turn to the thinker and the great public intellectual Edward Said for a second. And to think about how he imagined what, not secularism, not secularity, but what secular practice, what a secular notion of being a human in the world every day might look like. Said describes the secular as a practice premised on the suspicion of totalizing concepts, reified objects, guilds, and other religio-nationalist orthodoxies that seem to be all too familiar in our present moment. At the heart of this concept, however, are not religion or ethnic politics, but nationalism and the nation-state, for it is within the latter that the falsely organic ideas of belonging and kinship are reinvigorated to create socio-political and religious structures of majority and exclusion. This does not mean, however, that we limit the possibilities of Said's conception of what the secular offers. His powerful reimagining is one that is oppositional to any form of hegemony. So revolution can turn hegemonic as it solidifies, and that is really where the concept of the Saidian secular becomes very important. It is oppositional to any form of hegemony that seeks to exclude, be it ethno-nationalism, religious orthodoxy, or other. And the task of what Said calls the secular critic, and that is really the position he asks intellectuals in particular to take on a daily basis. What he actually asks the secular critic to do is to function, and the work is to be life-enhancing and constitutively opposed to every form of tyranny, domination, and abuse. And again, Said makes this very loose, precisely because he's able to say that there is a moment where revolution or where new ideals can in fact become dogmatic. What is revolutionary and new in the present may be dogmatic and coercive within a decade, and that is really the care I would ask students in this critical juncture in Bangladesh to remember. As Bruce Robbins reminds us, and Said's most famous work, of course, is Orientalism. It's a classic textbook for any student of history, literary studies, etc. Orientalism offered a new humanism, one that existed in a critical, paradoxical continuity with its predecessor, which is of course the European idea of humanism. And this last point marks what I can only describe as an ethics of generosity that Edward Said has brought to the field of post-colonial studies, one that is increasingly marked by scholars whose rigid positions against modernity and strident calls to recover an idyllic pre-colonial past only obfuscate the potential of a meaningful post-colonial engagement. I'll just finish off, guys. Let me just end by saying that there is no recovery of a golden past. The golden past of Islam is not going to be recovered, it's not going to come back. So the only meaningful engagement at this point is with the position, with a secular critical position that does not discount religion, but asks it to participate in what is a broader world of men, women, and people of different natures. Thank you so much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to everyone. Last year I was invited to Oxford debate to talk about a topic that was given is Islam is incompatible with democracy. So I was on the bench of opposition, while those from the other bench, mainly from, let me say, self-proclaimed, and those who are saying that they are secularists, they are Muslim. They have their argument, we have mine, we have ours, and I started my discussion by saying that actually whatever debates about Islam and democracy, religion, modernity, religion and democracy, whatever, has been ended by what happened in Gaza. The very ideology. Now, I'm not talking from, emotional or religious point of view. I'm talking from the point of view of humanity. The very ideals of Western democracy that we always look up since the day of Huntington and Fukuyama came to the idea of the end of history. I mean, this myth has been shredded, has been put in the bin of history, trash can of history after what happened in Gaza. One of these proponents of Islam is incompatible with democracy, saying that Islam will never be compatible with democracy because we cannot accept the debate of Prophet Muhammad. We cannot accept when people trying to put caricatures and mocking Prophet Muhammad. Whereas he said Christianity is compatible with democracy because they can accept when anybody is saying that Jesus was a gay. So what kind of mentality is this? Your very shallow judgment on the compatibility of certain dogma with democracy, with modernity, is based on mocking the gods, mocking the prophets. What kind of woke mentality that we're living with? Looking at the discussion of modernity and religion, I was telling Professor Alex from Korea, I thought this discussion has ended during science. 40, 30 years ago. Now people are talking about beyond modernity. People are talking about the function of religiosity, the function of religion. Yesterday, one of the speakers from Nepal was talking about good governance in state of democracy. For me, it's very simple. Whether it's Malaysian experience, whether it's whoever experience, if religion can create good citizens, law-abiding citizens, individuals who's functioning economically, socially, politically, if religion can contribute towards the fight against corruption, to put an end to corruption, enhance good governance, uphold humanity, uphold international law, uphold human rights, if religion can bring development, can bring economy, can motivate innovators, workers, leaders to be more competent, to be efficient, I have no problem with religion. to be in any place in public sphere. You know, yes, with due respect to philosophical, academic discussion about where is religion and modernity, how, no. Let's look at the practicality aspect of where should we place religion. You know, sometimes I became very frustrated with certain religious people. They're talking about, oh, we need Sharia this, Sharia that, we need this, caliphate that. When it comes to corruption, they have no problems. When it comes to work, they would be the last to come to the office and the first to leave the office before anybody else. I have problem with this kind of religiosity. You try to preserve your relation with God, but you forget your relation not only with other fellow human beings, but to the environment. Yesterday when I was talking about climate change and how Bangladesh should take the lead on the issue of climate change in this region, I'm sure I'm talking from a very religious point of view, because that is the very idea of stewardship or Khalifa. You're trying to bring rahmah, the mercy, to the human being, to the world. This is where religion should be positioned. Religion should not be used should not be used as a tool for oppression, as a tool to look at the others as second-class citizens, to look at other genders that they are less human than yourself. Religion is to uphold justice. Religion is to enhance accountability, is to enhance efficiency, is to enhance transparency, not only in the term of government governance, but also in your daily life, in your conduct with your family, in your conduct with your neighbors, in your conduct with your community. If religion can bring good health care, if religion could uphold, could uplift the level of education, could open equity to access to quality education for all citizens, regardless of whether they are elites or whether they are coming from poor family, whether they live in the center, in urban, or whether they live in rural area. For me, that is the religion which I believe. And the talk about whether we should embrace secularity or religion, those are the past. We need to go beyond that. The function of religion, the function of religiosity that we all should embrace. I mean, all the rhetorics were mainly a symptom of post-colonial situation. Prof. Picard mentioned earlier. And I have a lot to say, but I would like to conclude that if religion could bring more money, if religion could improve your economy, could bring more production, and you would place yourself in better situation at corruption perception index and human rights, whatever, by all means, please embrace religion. But if religion means you are dealing with others and by oppression, you're oppressing others, you're treating others as second-class citizens, and you use them as identity, as separation, as division rather than unity, I don't believe in that kind of religiosity. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum. I will not take too much time. I know you have listened too much, too long. As teacher, I know that the attention span of people, particularly so many of you are young students, is no more than 15 minutes. And my American students, it was 30 seconds. And people have given half an hour long speeches, so I will do it in 2 minutes, and I'm not going to answer, unfortunately, the question that you have raised, because that's a research that has been going on for 10 years of my life that I cannot spend in 2 minutes. I will rather bring something to your attention that my previous discussants and the participants in this discussion have brought up, and I thought this was a discussion. So let me discuss some of the discussion points. The modernity and religion clash that has been put out there, as opposites is truly a problem of today, because we do not take religion very seriously in the public sphere. We have decided that religion belongs to the private sphere. It's a primitive concept and only primitive people follow religion, but religion has immense power, as you can see, and people like us who do intellectual work, pretending that this primitive form will not challenge or undo the structures of society that we have created, we are rather foolish. The people who have taken control of religion are people who perhaps in today's Bangladesh, I come from India, I have seen this very well, has politicized and weaponized it to a point that people are not able to recognize one another as neighbors. They have all become enemies of one another, and enmity is seen as nationalism and patriotism. I do not know what is the answer to this, but this is a process that has been going on, not just today. It is an old process. Irfan mentioned that modernity is a Christian belief or Christian development. Yes, as a historian, I know it's a Christian belief, but the Christian world has also pushed itself to something called Middle Ages, and the word that we use, medieval history, and they continue to use the word medieval history for South Asia as the Dark Ages, i.e. the Muslim presence in South Asia is the Dark Ages. And yet from the Dark Age of history emerged something called Sulh Kul, the capacity not to be secular, but to be tolerant. It's not toleration. I do not tolerate you. I have tolerance in order to live a life that dignifies my humanity and dignifies your humanity. It is that kind of tolerance. I'm a firm, we have been talking, Maryam and I openly and fully would tell you, and I have always been writing history from a point of view of being a Muslim woman. And I do it unapologetically, and I'll continue to do so. It is my religion that has taught me how to write history of humanity, okay? So I will tell you very honestly that my religion, this is not confessional, this is an intellectual question, that how can religion lead us to be human beings in the world, not in the past or present or future, just human beings, the insan. So the modernity question that came into this is a liberal project, and the liberal project has decided that you have to be homogeneously same. We all must behave the same way. We all must dress the same way. We all must be tolerant or toleration of people who are different from us or who have politics. So we are taught to be homogeneous. But where we come from, South Asia, people like you and me, in Assam, we have a concept called Han Miholi, the blended, okay? The blended is the one that sort of can weave patterns of sameness even in difference. I have been reading a French philosopher, Muslim convert from way back of the early 20th century, Mansour Montel, who was a student of Massimio. And he wrote a book called The Five Colors of Islam. And the five colors of Islam are geographic and cultural. And in that, he talked about acculturation, not assimilation, acculturation. Acculturation allows you to become part of something. And here in Bangladesh, the Sufis who had come in the 13th century accultured to the local system. The Sufis who went to Khorasan accultured to the local system. Acculturation, which is Indonesian also that we're talking about, Malaysia, Indonesia, has allowed people to see the diversity, the diverse colors of Islam. Today, on the other hand, I'll end with this diversity, the colors of Islam, the five colors of Islam, people are trying to homogenize it just like the liberal project of the West. And I personally think we need to absolutely not accept it, because Islam means a mix, the five colors that allow you, the five pillars, the five ethics, everything allows you to become better human beings. There is a homogenization process which is not simply standardizing Islam. it is trying to create a pure Islam. And Maryam, Professor Maryam said, there's no past, present, and future to go back to some nostalgia. The idea is to learn from what we have been given, the message of living like human beings with one another, respecting others, and through this acculturation process, make Islam the color of that place, blended with the local and feeling that you are together a human community. It is not a question of secular or religious, it is a question of humanity, manavikata, manushyata, insaniyat, and that is what I will conclude with.
Good afternoon. I'm Alex from South Korea. I'm really happy to be here to share the different opinions on religion. You know, I'm a philosopher, so I want to defend philosophy, against religious faith, because actually, you know, there are a long history, you know, to debate whether philosophy is useful for religion, you know, since the 11th century, all right? We have, actually, today, in my opinion, made by three enlightenments. You know, first one is Confucian enlightenment. It's China, all right? It's almost the 12th century that happened. Another enlightenment is now totally forgotten Islamic enlightenment. Islamic enlightenment. And third one, as we know, and we learned in our textbook, is what? The European enlightenment. You know, all three enlightenment is interconnected. Today's in historical study, we build lots of evidence. So even, you know, any, you know, historical study on these three enlightenments, you can find out how that is related. It's Karl Jasper's Jewish, you know, German Jewish, you know, Jewish German philosopher. He made the term the axial age. Axial age is before the, you know, Christianity, the human being had shared, you know, same history to pursue, you know, enlightenment. And these enlightenment actually they're omnipresent in any, you know, human history. All right. So not many people actually, you know, thought about this one. Actually, the discussant already talked about secularization and secularity, something like that. But this secular, you know, the debate on this concept of secularity is given by, ironically, Islamic enlightenment. You know, the Confucian, no interest in a religion. The Confucianism anti-religious enlightenment, not, you know, the only European enlightenment. You know? European enlightenment is ambiguous. They didn't give up religion, right? They didn't give up religion, and they still stuck to. That is a big problem for European enlightenment because they didn't give up religion. For them, religion means Christianity only. Even they hated, you know, Judaism. They hated Muslim. So because they believe that Christianity is the only high form of the religion. So this is actually really, in my opinion, really the validated concept. So we need to rethink in history because now we are facing total failure of a European enlightenment. We have three examples which show that this total failure. First one, Gaza. You know, Gaza showed that. Definitely, that is the end of European humanism. You know, we cannot defend human rights. They're observing what happened in Gaza. You know, they betrayed. That means European enlightenment betrayed its own logic. And then, second one, more ridiculous, Trump. Trump showed that the end of liberal democracy, which actually rooted in Christian, you know, enlightenment, definitely. And then third one, nowadays is rapidly emerging. What's what? Artificial intelligence. It's destroying definitely what? The foundation of knowledge, which was created by European Enlightenment. What actually makes difference between European Enlightenment and other Enlightenment? Which one? Of course, the Confucian Enlightenment, developed, marvelous, achievement of technology. Chinese people had a nice technology, before the European Enlightenment. European Enlightenment brought that technology to their Europe, and they developed that. But actually, what European Enlightenment made their own distinction, different from other Enlightenment, Islamic Enlightenment and Confucian Enlightenment, science. But ironically, this science was brought by Islamic Enlightenment to Europe. And then even Islamic Enlightenment brought, Europe, what? Philosophy. So there was huge debate over this issue, secularism and religion. Debate between, Al-Ghazali and others. This is very important philosophical debate. So Spinoza, Hegel, inspired by this debate, and Spinoza tried to what? Tried to defend Averroes, because Averroes defended philosophy. And Al-Ghazali said, there is no evidence, the link between, the religious faith and philosophical thought. But Averroes tried to defend philosophy. Philosophy is useful for what? Enhancing, or some developing the religious faith. But of course, Averroes was defeated, and then he escaped. He went back to Cordoba. Spain, now the Spanish, city is a city of a philosopher. Very important. If you visited Cordoba, you can see that Averroes statue there, on the river. I really love the Averroes. The theological, political, the treatise. He actually argued that the philosophy is useful for the keeping on this religious faith. And Hegel developed further, and then he actually he's very European guy. That's why he actually took both sides. He said the philosophy is what? Is a think about the world through the conceptualization. And then while religious faith, religion is a higher form of modernity, which actually think the world through the representation, symbol and image. So actually Hegel paved the way toward, we can take both religion and philosophy together in modern society. So problem is not the modernity. Problem is not secularization or secularism. Because this secularism, this term as such, is given by Romantics, is a German philosophers. All right? Secularization. That's why actually they said that we must re-enchant the world. In the world which actually lost their faith on the world. That is actually the Romantic project. But I don't think actually Romanticism is really successful, because actually this Romantic sentiment ended up with fascism. All right? So nowadays, we need actually to rethink this history and then rethink religion from the perspective of philosophy, in my opinion. So we need a philosophy, and philosophy can save the religious faith only. At the moment, we actually are observing, witnessing total failure of European Enlightenment, and then what kind of the world we should, recreate these days. This as a failure, only human being, not machine, can learn something from failure. That is our actually the vision of the new world. Thank you very much.